Senator from Edgefield.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator, this is the sine die resolution, and I don't know that it needs a whole lot of explanation. But my understanding is the House made one amendment to it, and that would allow the General Assembly in the sine die period, which would be after Thursday, to consider congressional redistricting and to receive any conference reports if necessary to deal with congressional redistricting. I think, Mr. President, that is the only amendment that is on that the House put on the resolution. So that is really what's before us. And I know there are some amendments that senators have to propose. Those will obviously come up. I want to give my thoughts on this before we get to those amendments, and also understand procedurally, and I think this is important, Mr. President, for everybody to understand. The sine die, of course, requires a 2/3 vote, but because of the posture it's in, whenever we get to the last amendment that's up there, that vote could very well send the sine die back, right? There may not be an up or down vote on the sine die itself because of that posture. Make sure everybody understands that. Right, if there are amendments, if the last amendment up gets adopted, it's going back. Okay, there will not be a separate vote on the resolution itself. So I want everybody to understand that. Make sure we know what amendments are up there, and especially whichever one is last. Because if the last amendment receives a 2/3 vote, it's gone. Okay, just to make sure everybody understands what we're dealing with here. All right. So last week was a pretty interesting week for me. I had never had the privilege of speaking with the President of the United States until last week, and it really was. It was a privilege. I enjoyed the conversation. It was a very good conversation. He gave me more.
Sergeants, I want the senator to have the attention of the body. Senator from Edgefield.
Thank you, sir. The President of the United States gave me more time in a phone call than I could have expected. It was a good phone call. It was very gracious, and I won't relay all of it, but there are some things that I want to talk about because the President told me, he said, look, I hope you can help us out. He said, but I understand you got to do what you're comfortable with. You got to do what you think is right. He said, but these people, talking about the Democrats in Washington, he said, these people are crazy. Yes, sir, I agree with you. He told me, these people hate me. And I think, Mr. President, that's obvious. There's no question about that. There is a lot of hatred in Washington. There's a lot of hatred in the world. And he's certainly the recipient of a lot of that. There's no question there. The President doesn't want the Democrats to win the majority of the House of Representatives. I don't either. I would hope that the home team can retain the majority. And I would also hope that if the home team retains the majority, that they'll actually do something productive with it. Over the last year and a half, I suspect if we look back at what they've done with the majority, I don't know that anybody in here could name more than one piece of legislation they passed. And no matter how big and beautiful it was, there's a whole lot more that they've left on the table. And that, to me, is disappointing, to have a majority that doesn't do anything with it. I will say, however, that if the Democrats do win control of the United States House of Representatives, it will not be because of South Carolina. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. It won't be because of South Carolina. And I am curious what they could actually do if they even want it. They're not going to have the ability to pass anything. If anything, I think what they would probably do is just remind people of what they have done and what they would do if they were given larger control. But I want to talk some, Mr. President, about my concerns regarding this proposal. I'm not here to persuade anybody. I'm not here to advocate for any position. My purpose in speaking today is really about explaining why I have arrived at the position that I've arrived at. You know, what really got this conversation started was the U.S. Supreme Court opinion week before last in Louisiana versus Callais. And that opinion sparked a lot of conversation, and it led to a number of states, especially across the Southeast, looking at their congressional maps. And that resulted in a lot of attention on South Carolina about our congressional maps. And because of that opinion, the conclusion from a lot of people is that our maps are unconstitutional and we must change them. We must change them to be compliant with the Constitution. The president asked me to look at our map in light of that opinion. The governor has asked us to look at our maps in light of that opinion. I think those are reasonable requests. I think in light of the Supreme Court opinion, we absolutely should look at our map. And we did. Mr. President, we've looked extensively at that. We've had conversations with attorneys who've represented the Senate in the past, just a couple years ago when we got approval in the U.S. Supreme Court of our map. We have looked at that issue. And I think it's important that everybody understand this. Our map is perfectly constitutional right now. We are not Louisiana. We are not Alabama. We are not Mississippi. Our map is not unconstitutional. The Louisiana versus Callais opinion does not apply to South Carolina because South Carolina does not have a Section 2 district. South Carolina used to have a Section 2 district 30 years ago, but it does not have a Section 2 district today because the population has changed. And the result of that is that we do not have a Section 2. We do not have a majority-minority district. Our districts are perfectly constitutional. The U.S. Supreme Court told us that in 2024. And I know what I've heard is that, well, that challenge was dealing with the first. It was not dealing with the sixth. And indeed, it did focus primarily on the first. However, at the core of that challenge was that the General Assembly had impermissibly moved people from the first into the sixth and from the sixth into the first. You can't talk about the first without talking about the sixth, right? They go together. If one is constitutional, so is the other. If the first is constitutional, so is the sixth. We do not have a racial gerrymander. And I know that surprises a lot of people. We don't. We do not have a racial gerrymander in our congressional map. We do have a partisan gerrymander. And there are a number of us who worked to that effort in 2021 to create that. The senator from Charleston and I had the displeasure of being deposed for hours and even having to testify in U.S. District Court on that issue. And look, we based our current map on partisan numbers. We were trying to maximize Republican seats, and I'm not shy about saying it. That's what we did, right? We tried to maximize our seats, and effectively what we were trying to do is to shore up the first district for a Republican candidate. And this is what this is the way we did it, right? We created a 6-1 map. Mr. President, we did it before everybody else did it. So our map, the 6th district, is not constitutional. Not unconstitutional. There is frankly no real argument that it is unconstitutional. Because if you read the Louisiana opinion and you read Alexander, which was ours, if you read those two opinions, in fact, in the Louisiana opinion, they even reference Alexander as the basis of their opinion. If you read those two opinions, you know that our districts are perfectly constitutional. Now, that in itself doesn't end the question. You can still have the political question of whether we should go beyond 6-1. And I think ultimately that's what the question is before us today. Now, I've got a number of concerns about this, and I don't want to take all day with it, but I do want to explain my concerns here. The first is, of course, trying to go to 7-0, I think, is extremely risky from a political standpoint. I think at best you're going to get 6-1, and you may even go 5-2. I've told the press a number of times, I think if you get cute with this, you could end up in a 5-2 scenario. I don't want to go 5-2. I don't want Hakeem Jeffries as the Speaker of the House. I think the best chance that South Carolina has to prevent that from happening is with our current maps, because we know what we're going to get. We don't know what we're going to get on the other side. What we've had different proposals, the numbers keep changing. The numbers are not reliable. We don't know what the numbers are in reality. What I do know is that we're 6-1 today. And if we want to maximize our chances, we know what we've got. And if we start tinkering with this, my concern is that we can make this a whole lot worse. The map that's been proposed, I told a lot of people when they've asked me about this, that we looked at all of our different ways to maximize things. We couldn't come up with 7-0. The map that's been proposed is closer to 7-0 than anything I've seen. We didn't think about that. Now, I'll tell you the reason we didn't think about that. Because the map that's been proposed, every map that I have seen, destroys something that has always been extremely important when the General Assembly has looked at drawing maps. And that is preserving communities of interest. This proposal blows that up. Right? This proposal has Clemson and Columbia in the same Senate and in the same congressional district. This proposal does real and extreme damage to York County. It just flat out does. York and Lancaster go together. When you split York and Lancaster, you're going to do damage to Lancaster and to York. Because right now, York and Lancaster anchor the 5th District. Splitting them up divides a traditional and historic community of interest. But it does more than that, because the proposal that's out there splits York County itself. It takes Fort Mill out of York County, takes it out of the 5th, puts it into the 6th. Right? That is a real problem as well. That changes the anchor in that district. It changes that community of interest. Those people who have for so long bandied together to advocate for federal policy changes are going to be split. Their strength is diminished. The district is weakened. Those things that South Carolina has traditionally relied on to advocate for federal policy is diminished because of that change. And there's no question about that. It sends a lot of that over into Greenville and Pickens counties, which, if you are in York or Lancaster County, has a significant impact on your ability to impact your congressperson, to influence those elections. It may very well be to the point that where York has anchored a congressional district for decades, may no longer have that. That is a real problem. They didn't consider that because that wasn't their concern. As South Carolinians, however, we should consider that. This district, this map, puts Myrtle Beach in the same district with Charleston. Y'all, Myrtle Beach and Charleston are not the same. They are not the same culturally. They are not the same economically. They don't have the same needs. They don't have the same issues that rise to the level of federal intervention. They are very different. And when you put them together, you're going to have the result of that is going to be to diminish either the influence that Myrtle Beach has or the influence that Charleston has. Putting Myrtle Beach in the same district with the port is a problem, y'all. Separating Myrtle Beach from Florence is a problem in the PD. Myrtle Beach and Florence go together. They complement each other. Florence and Lancaster do not. When they were drawing this map, they didn't consider those things. Those things weren't important to them. And I understand it, and I think their concern is important. It is absolutely important. But there are other concerns that you have to look at. There is no way that we would have come up with a map that just blows up those traditional and historic communities of interest. I think that is something that is very important. It should be important for us. I also think doing this is going to tick some people off. Now, I'm not concerned about ticking off Democrats. That doesn't bother me. I do that every day standing right here. We'll talk about that a little bit too. But what I am concerned about is how will this be received by people in the middle? Look, everybody, I think we get lost on this sometimes. Everybody in South Carolina is not a rabid partisan like I am. Everybody in South Carolina is not a rabid partisan like we are. All right, most people in South Carolina think we're freaking crazy. All right, they do. And I know that, you know that, but when you look at primary turnout, we're 10, 12, maybe in a presidential year we get up to 20. Like, that's what the percentage turnout of those who've registered to vote. All right, most people are not partisan. Most people are in the middle and they can go back and forth. Now, South Carolina, most South Carolinians are conservative. That doesn't mean they always vote for Republicans, but they're conservative. And I think when you do something like this, there's going to be an impact. I also think that one of the side effects of this is, very candidly, you're going to motivate black turnout. And there will be repercussions for that. There will be down-ballot repercussions for that. This will have an effect on state house races. It will have an effect on county council races. There will be some of those races. Y'all remember the state house races had some very narrowly decided. So did we, right? So did we, gentlemen. But the state house has even more narrowly decided races. This will have an impact on them. There will be Republican losses in the State House of Representatives because of this. There will be Republican losses on county council because of this. It will have that effect. They didn't consider that. That wasn't their concern, and I understand that, but it's a concern that I have. Here's another concern that I have that I'm really having a difficult time getting around. We already have ballots that have been cast. But it's not just any ballots, y'all. We have active duty military that are serving around the world that have already submitted their ballots. Now, they may be in some pretty harmless places, like maybe Germany, South Korea sometimes. You've probably got some people who are on a battleship or are flying missions over the desert who have already cast their ballots. The effect of this is to discard those ballots. That's tough for me. If you change the primary dates, some of those people will not be able to vote because they're going to be in different places. They're going to get shipped around. Who knows where they're going to be in 2 months? Some of those people, some of those active duty military who have already cast ballots will not be able to cast a ballot. That is a problem. It should be a problem. I'm very concerned about that. There are lots of other absentee ballots that have already been cast, both from overseas voters, but even even domestically, like we're already within this time period where the Election Commission has been mailing out absentee ballots to your 85-year-old neighbor who prefers to vote by absentee because our law allows it. There are ballots that may not have been received but are in the mail. These ballots will be discarded, at least from their congressional races, or depending on what decisions we make on that. That is troubling to me. I also think it's important to recognize there are logistical difficulties for the Election Commission to hold 2 statewide races in the summer. And we just passed a bill, last week, 2 weeks ago, to try to make uniform special elections that would have the first special elections would be in August. The proposal that's been talked about in the House would be to have, first off, splitting the primaries, which I think is a terrible idea. If you're a congressional candidate, you know this is a terrible idea. It is going to result in a much diminished turnout. It is going to result in confusion among voters, because as much as this is a surprise to us, most people ain't listening to us. Right? Most people are living their lives. They ain't got time to watch this comedy show. Many people are going to be confused by having 2 sets of primaries, if that's what the General Assembly elects to do. We've got logistical issues with school start dates in August. But there are a number of logistical issues, and we're not even going to talk about how much money it's going to cost. But I do think those are things that matter. They're things that we need to consider. Those are things that have not been considered before, but they will absolutely have an impact on South Carolinians. I said earlier that if the U.S. House goes to a Democratic majority, it won't be because of South Carolina. That's because we are already heavily gerrymandered. We are the most gerrymandered Republican state in the country already. And we did that intentionally. There have been celebrated changes in Florida over the last week. Those celebrated changes in Florida get them to where we are now. Yesterday, the U.S. Supreme Court allowed Alabama to use a map that it had passed but had previously been stopped by the courts. Yesterday, they allowed Alabama to use this map that they passed before. Alabama also has 7 congressional districts. That map would allow Alabama to use a 6-1 map. Right? The U.S. Supreme Court decision yesterday allowed Alabama to do what we have already done. Now, those are all important reasons, but there are other reasons. There are other things that I think are actually bigger concerns. Mr. President, South Carolina has always punched above its weight in Washington. We've always had, some of those people are represented in portraits hanging in this chamber. We have always had the ability to punch above our weight and deliver. And I'm not just talking about like earmarks or monetary requests, but we have had the ability to influence national, if not international, policy from South Carolina. Look, you look right over here, Jimmy Burns, a lot of people don't know who that is. Actually, I think Jimmy Burns is one of the most impactful and influential South Carolinians in history. What he was able to do in the United States Congress, what he was able to do in the Senate. Jimmy Burns effectively ran the country in World War II because President Roosevelt was focused on the war. Jimmy Burns got his start in the district that I represent. We have always punched above our weight. To the gentleman in the corner over here, the gentleman above him, Floyd Spence is in here too. He got, Senator Sessler bumped him out. But we've always punched above our weight. Yeah, better not. Yeah. And we've been able to do that, and this is important. We've been able to punch above our weight regardless of the administration, regardless of who the president is, regardless of who occupies the White House, South Carolina has been able to deliver, not just for South Carolina, but for the country and the world. We have had that influence. Doing this will absolutely diminish that influence. It just will. And everybody knows it, right? Everybody in here, everybody who's familiar with the process, we understand what's going to happen here. Look, y'all, regardless of who the president is, regardless of who's in charge, there has to be somebody in South Carolina who can make a phone call and somebody at the White House will answer it. If we don't have that, South Carolinians are the ones that are going to suffer because of it. Whether we're talking about the state as a whole or individually, South Carolinians will suffer if we don't have influence regardless of who's in the White House. I believe, I'm convinced, this map diminishes that influence. I also believe that our state is stronger with vibrant parties. I think we as a whole are stronger when we have a clash of ideas. I think that's true at the national level. I think it's true at the state level. We are stronger when we have a clash of ideas and we can discuss those policy goals. I will tell my Republican friends, Republicans are stronger when the Democrat Party is vibrant and viable. We are. Competition makes you better, y'all. We know it in the economic sector. It also happens in the political sector. Competition makes you better. Now, part of that, I think, allows us to display just how wacky some of their ideas are. And frankly, we don't have to do it to them. They can do it themselves. But more than that, though, it sharpens our skills. It makes our ideas stronger. It makes our policies better. It makes South Carolina better in the long run if we allow for that debate to occur. A legitimate opponent will make a competitor better every time. I've heard it argued, I've seen it argued on social media, I've heard it argued, people have told me this, that this is what you're supposed to do with power. This is what you're supposed to do with a supermajority. You're supposed to punish your opponents. Really? Is that how it's supposed to work? Is that how it's supposed to work here? I mean, I know that's how it works in some other places around the world, but is that how it's supposed to work here? You know, to most people in the country, I think this is a perfect example of just how much elected officials have lost their way. Too many people in power just want to do whatever it takes to stay in power. They'll do whatever it takes to keep it. But I ask, to what end? What do you do with it when you've attained it? I believe the legitimate use of power in this context is to make people safer, to ensure they have the freedom to make decisions to guide their own lives, to offer opportunities for success. You know, this whole outdated idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I don't seek power to punish. I want it to uplift. And I think we have been extremely successful here in the Senate and in the General Assembly in doing just that over the last several years, of advancing those goals. We have, I think, Mr. President, we have used our power effectively and appropriately. Now, I know there are a number of my Democratic colleagues who don't think that's the case. They don't agree with me on that. They think that we have been heavy-handed. They think that we have come down too hard on them. I promise you it could have been a whole lot worse. I have tried very hard, and I've said this publicly and privately, I don't want to be Washington. I don't want the Senate to be the House of Representatives. It could be. But I've tried to make it not that way. And others have tried to make it not that way. And I get it. I mean, I think a lot of our Democratic senators or House members think that we have been too heavy-handed, and I get it. If you're not in the majority, you don't get to set the agenda and you don't get the things that you want. I understand. It also means that you lose a lot of things that you don't want to lose on. I understand that too. Mr. President, I suspect that over the last several years that statewide, if you gave the Democrats an opportunity to take out one legislator from the House or the Senate, I suspect I'm at the top of the list. And I think I've earned that. And that's okay. That's all right. But I think we need to use the power that we've been entrusted with in a legitimate manner. And we have been extremely successful at advancing a number of conservative goals in that effort. I don't think you accomplish those goals by stamping out the opposition and not giving them a voice. Crushing the minority opposition is not a demonstration of strength. It's an admission of fear and a show of weakness. And I don't think it's successful in the long term anyway. If you tell children, heck, even adults, if you tell them, don't go in that room, there's something harmful in that room, don't go in there, what are they going to do? They all opening the door, aren't they? So are we. Everybody does it. It's human nature. If you're told not to do something, you're going to do it. If you're told not to watch this television show, you're going to watch it. If you're told not to listen to this song, you're going to listen to it. If I tell my daughter, don't get on social media, she's going to do it because I told her not to. That's human nature. I would say also that if you crush the opposition, if you stamp them out, if you don't allow the voice to be heard, people will listen even more intently. They will listen more closely. The majority will give credibility to minority voices by trying to crush it. We will make people in the middle, those who are not rabid partisans, they will be more receptive to arguments that they are not receptive to now because we've told them they shouldn't even hear it. Because that's how humans work. Trying to silence a voice, which is effectively what this does, right? That's effectively what this does. Trying to silence a voice is going to result in people wanting to hear that voice. That is especially the case here, where that minority voice consistently represents 40 to 45% of the electorate. Trying to stamp out that voice will cause more people to pay attention to it. And those of us in power who try to do that to the minority will give more credibility to it. It is a self-defeating effort. There are many historical examples of this. Y'all know what I'm saying is true. But there are historical examples of it. Look, the French Revolution began with some legitimate public complaints. And it quickly went out of control. Robespierre, who ignited the fire, ultimately determined that in order to save the Republic, he had to pursue policies that were antithetical to the Republic. So began the Reign of Terror. Now, we know how that ended. At least I hope we know how that ended. We've done a really crappy job these days of teaching history and civics. Last week and this week is time for, if you have a high school student, you know this is the time of the year when they're taking the end of course exams. The end of course exam that is we always do the worst on. We take end of course tests on sciences, on literature, on English, on math, all these things. The end of course test that South Carolina students always do the worst on? U.S. history and the Constitution. We are failing our children in that regard, y'all. And that I suspect that if we ask, and this is not U.S. history or the Constitution, but if you ask high school seniors in South Carolina who was Robespierre, you're going to get blank looks. But Robespierre is extremely important for us to understand of who we are, how we got here, what we should be, and more importantly, what we should not be. Y'all, I didn't sign up for Parliament. And I don't want to be in Parliament. I don't like that the Congress, over the last 125 years or so, has effectively relinquished its legislative authority to the executive, whomever that executive is. I think it's bad for the separation of powers. It's bad for the country. It is something that, as a huge fan, I don't want to get the senator from Charleston worked up here, as a huge fan of James Madison, it is antithetical to his creation. And my default position on government is Madison was probably right. Whatever the issue is, my default position is Madison was probably right. Didn't mean he didn't do some bad things in his life. Didn't mean he's right about everything. But on matters of government, Madison's probably right. You got to prove to me that he wasn't. The separation of powers may actually be the most important governmental doctrine that has been created in the history of man. It is that important. And what the Congress has done to relinquish their authority to the executive is terrible. And we all see the results of that. There's another important principle that is enshrined in the Constitution that has been whittled away some as well. This one should be important to all of us. Another brilliant creation, and that is of federalism and the sovereignty of the states. I don't want to be a participant in further eroding federalism and further diminishing the essential role of states. This issue, like so many others, is by design and writ of the Constitution exclusively reserved to the states and the people of the state's elected representatives. And so it should be. The states are not mere political subdivisions of the federal government. The states are not here to take orders and direction. The states are sovereign, independent creatures. Those sovereign, independent creatures willingly relinquished certain powers and authority to gain certain specified cohesive protections. They did not relinquish more than what is explicitly written. They did not expect to gain more than that which is explicitly written. And with the portrait of Calhoun behind me, I cannot in good conscience surrender this authority that has been preserved to, for, and by the states and merely take orders from those who are not in South Carolina. Especially from those whose concern on this issue, while understandable, I absolutely understand what the president's concern is here. I understand what the president's issue is here. I don't disagree with that. But there are other concerns that we have to consider. Those concerns have not been considered at all with the proposal that we have. Those concerns affect South Carolina and South Carolinians, and it is up to us to consider those things. If we don't consider those concerns of South Carolina, there is no one left. We are the last line. I have too much Southern blood in me to surrender. Indeed, as some of you will recognize, it is my heritage to stand erect, proud and unafraid, to think and act for myself, enjoy the benefits of my creations, to face the whole world boldly and say, I am a free American. That's what I try to accomplish today. Nikita Khrushchev reportedly said, "We will bury you from within." It was a recognition that it was extremely unlikely that anybody could ever conquer the United States from outside. that we would always join together and defend ourselves, and that we would be triumphant in that defense. But he thought there was a fatal flaw. He thought that the American system itself was contradictory, that it couldn't last, that the contradictions of capitalism that creates class struggles and economic inequality would be the downfall, that it would lead to uprisings and we would destroy ourselves. Look around, ladies and gentlemen. Maybe he was right. Maybe the way to conquer the United States of America is not externally. Maybe it is to incite internal troubles and to have us turn on ourselves. Maybe it includes declaring your neighbors, your political opponents, as enemies of the state. And rather than having a public debate of ideas and allowing the public to decide, maybe it means just putting the boot down on the minority. I hear those who say they would do it to you. We've all heard that. If the Democrats were in power and they had the opportunity, they'd do it to you. Maybe. I don't know. We've seen that in other places. I would hope that wouldn't be the case. But I'm not naive. My larger question, though, is that the way it should happen? They do it to you, so you should do it to them? Do unto others as you believe they would do unto you? Is that it? Is that what we teach our children? Does it only apply to children? Right, does it only apply to children? Does it not apply to adults? I don't remember that being the context in the Gospel of Matthew. And I don't think the Messiah meant it only as something to apply to children. But how we interact with each other. I think you do what you know to be right. Sometimes you'll get taken advantage of it. You should do it anyway. You should do it because it's right. Not because you might win because of it. Not because it may hurt an opponent. You should do it because it's right. And I believe that good and decent people, those people who make up this state and this country, they will determine right from wrong. And they'll respond accordingly, even if that means at the ballot box. Now, I understand that sometimes it doesn't work out that way. It doesn't work out the way you want it to. It doesn't work out to be the way that you believe is the right way. And we become frustrated with that. Ladies and gentlemen, I understand that there are likely consequences for me personally standing here right now and taking the position that I'm in. I understand that. I'm comfortable with that. I may not like it, but I'm comfortable with it. I've got to look in the mirror. My conscience is clear on this one, y'all. I've had a number of people who, some of you in here have come up to me, hey, how you doing? I know you're taking a beating. Yeah, it's part of the gig. I've had people call me, ask me, hey, how's this going? I know you're taking a beating. Yeah, I mean that's true. That's it's not fun, but it's part of it. I've had people say, look, I know this is a hard one for you. Like, and I've taken a lot of hits, but this one isn't hard. This isn't hard at all. Like, there are some hard ones that come up. This one isn't hard for me because I know what the right thing to do is. My conscience is clear on it, regardless of what the result may be. Regardless, and I don't know, in fact, I had a conversation with the Deputy Chief of Staff this morning. He asked me what was going to happen. I said, I don't know, because I haven't counted votes. I haven't counted votes at all. Some of you have told me what you're thinking, but I haven't counted votes. I don't know where the votes are. I don't know what's going to happen in a little bit when we get there. You know, I've had many of y'all called to tell me that you've been getting a lot of pressure from the White House over the weekend, but I don't know what the vote count is. This is, as I've told many of you privately, and I think I've even said it publicly to the press, this is every senator for himself or herself. You got to do what you think is right. You got to make the best decision for South Carolina that you can make. Now, I will tell you, there are consequences for that, right? There are consequences either way, frankly. And I think we all need to recognize that going in. But, you know, I said I got too much Southern in my blood. I've got too much resistance in my heritage. I've had a number of people who've called me over the last several days and said, you know, hey, I've got this friend in the White House, or I've got this friend in this group that's involved in this, and they've been calling, they've been asking, how do we get to Massey? And they, every one of these people have told me that their response was, well, you don't try to bully him, right? I got too much red in my neck for that to happen. And it has the exact opposite effect on me. Now, I'll say, to their credit, they haven't done that with me. They've all been very nice to me. They've been very cordial. They've let me know what their position is. And maybe that changes after today. I don't know. But I recognize that's a possibility, if not a likelihood, and I'm comfortable with that because my conscience is clear. Mr. President, we've all heard the story of after those men suffered through the sweltering heat in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787, when they finally emerge in September, they come out, and there's this story. It may be apocryphal. I don't know if it's legit or not. But we've all heard the story that when they emerge, when Mr. Franklin emerges, very old at this point, he was probably the oldest of all the delegates. He emerges, and a woman approaches him and says, well, Dr. Franklin, what have you wrought? His response, as we all know, a republic. If you can keep it. If you can keep it. All the forces, every external force, sometimes internal forces, all the forces are working to pull it apart. If you can keep it. Maybe Khrushchev was right. Maybe we become convinced that the only way to preserve the republic is to implement policies that are contrary to the founding ideas of the republic. Maybe we turn on ourselves. Maybe 250 years in, maybe we can't keep it. I really hope that's not the case, but maybe it is. But if that's to happen, if we're going to further erode those institutions, if we're going to further erode those essential governmental protections, if we're going to lose this radical idea of a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, a nation that in its constitution guarantees to each state a republican form of government to ensure the debate of ideas, if that's going to happen, Mr. President, by God, it's not going to be because I surrendered it. I'm voting no.
Thank you, Senator from Edgefield. Senator